Part 5 of Federalist number 26. Now for the next few paragraphs, he will be talking about the provision in the Constitution that says you can only appropriate money for the military 2 years at a time. In other words, you cannot, the Congress of the United States can only give money for military operations for no longer than 2 years. And the reason for this is that they don't want the military or any branch of government, especially the executive, the president, to become too powerful and use this military to rule in an authoritarian way, to destroy the idea of checks and balances, the separation of powers, and things like that. And we know that the House of Representatives, the elections happen every 2 years. So he says if somebody gets out of hand, and if there's, let's say there's too much money allocated for military for whatever reason, you can elect new members and get rid of the old ones and redo the appropriations. And this is a good enough length of time where it would be hard for anybody to abuse it. He hints that yes, if it was longer than 2 years, might be dangerous. If it's shorter than 2 years, you cannot have a organized professional army if you don't make plans to fund it, to give it enough money to do its work, to do the training, to buy the military weapons or whatever that's needed, guns at that time. So he said you have to give it enough money to do what it needs to do to be able to defend you. But at the same time, you don't want to give it too much time. You don't want to give this money for too lengthy of a time for it to abuse its power. So keep that in mind. That's what he's going to talk about here in the next few paragraphs. So I'll start. This is paragraph 8. Let us examine whether there be any comparison in point of efficacy between the provision alluded to and that which is contained in the new Constitution for restraining the appropriation of money for military purposes to the period of 2 years. The former, by aiming at too much, is calculated to effect nothing. The latter, by steering clear of an imprudent extreme and by being perfectly compatible with a proper provision for the exigencies of the nation, will have a salutary and powerful operation. The legislature of the United States will be obliged by this provision once at least in every 2 years to deliberate upon the propriety of keeping a military force on foot. Notice every time we've come across the word deliberate, it's talking to really think very deeply and seriously about something. To come to a new resolution on the point and to declare their sense of the matter by a formal vote in the face of their constituents. They are not at liberty to vest in the executive department permanent funds for the support of an army if they were even incautious enough to be willing to repose in it so improper a confidence, as the spirit of party in different degrees must be expected to infect all political bodies. There will be no doubt persons in the national legislature willing enough to arraign the measure and criminate the views of the majority. the provision for the support of a military force will always be a favorable topic for declamation. As often as the question comes forward, the public attention will be roused and attracted to the subject by the party in opposition. And if the majority should be really disposed to exceed the proper limits, the community will be warned of the danger and will have an opportunity of taking measures to guard against it. Independent of parties in the national legislature itself, as often as the period of discussion arrived, the state legislatures, who will always be not only vigilant but suspicious and jealous guardians of the rights of the citizens against encroachment from the federal government, will constantly have their attention awake to the conduct of national rulers, of the national rulers, and will be ready enough, if anything improper appears, to sound the alarm to the people, and not only to be the voice, but if necessary, the arm of their discontent. So, 2 years for appropriation of money for a budget for military use is enough. It's not too short, it's not too long, and he's being realistic. He says, if there is any sign of somebody abusing this privilege, abusing this right, then members of other parties in Congress, in the Senate, will find out about it and will let people know. And Hamilton also says the state legislatures, who are always distrustful of the national government, they will keep a close eye on it too, to make sure that nobody is abusing power. And at the very last line, he says, well, if it gets to a point where they don't hear your voice and you can't do things by your voice, whether it's your voice, whether it's through your writing, whether it's by electing the right members of the Congress to change things around, if things get really, really bad, you can always go to arms. In other words, as the Declaration of Independence of the United States says, at the last resort, you can use arms if a government becomes tyrannical. Scheme to subvert the liberties of a great community required time to mature them for execution. An army so large as seriously to menace those liberties could only be formed by progressive augmentations, which would suppose not merely a temporary combination between the legislature and executive, but a continued conspiracy for a series of time. Is it probable that such a combination would exist at all? Is it probable that it would be preserved in and transmitted along through all the successive variations in a representative body, which biennial elections would naturally produce in both houses? Is it presumable that every man, the instant he took his seat in the National Senate or House of Representatives, would commence a traitor to his constituents and to his country? Can it be supposed that there would not be found one man discerning enough to detect so atrocious a conspiracy? Okay, can it be supposed that there would not be found one man discerning enough to detect so atrocious a conspiracy, or bold or honest enough to apprise his constituents of their danger? If such presumptions can fairly be made, there ought to be at once an end of all delegated authority. The people should resolve to recall all the powers they have heretofore parted with out of their own hands, and to divide themselves into as many states as there are counties, in order that they may be able to manage their own concerns in person. So he says, the system is not going to be corrupted because of these 2-year appropriations, because he says you have to be honest. For this thing not to work properly, for somebody to abuse this 2-year appropriation of money, they have to be really, really thinking about being traitors. And he's saying, are we that crazy to think that at all levels of government, these people are going to be working together hand in hand as traitors for so long? He says we're going to biennial election means every 2 years. So he says members of the House of Representatives get elected every 2 years. So you can throw the ones you don't like out. And then one nice thing about the Senate, we will get to it, all the members of the Senate do not go up for election at the same time. In other words, you don't have a complete turnover of the senators. Only every 2 years, only 1/3 of the members of the Senate are up for re-election. This will give stability to the system. They designed it this way so that the system becomes stable. So he says, do you think the system is going to be that corrupt that all the members of the House and 1/3 of the members of the Senate can be bought, can be purchased, can be corrupted? So he says, obviously this is not going to happen. So it'll be good. If we really cannot do this, then we might as well go ahead and divide ourselves into many county-size areas and start living only in our counties as if they are our nation state. So he says, you've got to be a little trustful that the people you represent you, that you elect, will not be corrupt enough to sell you out